Imagine for a moment that your blood sugar is not a number, but a quiet conversation happening inside your body every second of the day. A conversation between your cells and the energy they need to survive. After 65, this conversation changes its tone. It becomes slower, more nuanced, sometimes misunderstood. Yet most people are handed a lab report, shown a single number, and told it is either normal or abnormal, without ever being invited to understand what that number truly means for an aging body. This is where confusion begins, because normal blood sugar after 65 is not the same story it was at 35, and pretending otherwise does more harm than good. Blood sugar after 65 cannot be understood as a rigid line separating health from illness, because the body itself is no longer operating under the same assumptions it once did. Aging is not a malfunction. It is an ongoing biological negotiation. Every cell carries a memory of decades of work, repair and adaptation, and glucose, the body's primary fuel, moves through this changing landscape differently than it did in earlier years. When we speak of blood sugar in older adults, we are not talking about a system that has failed to meet a youthful standard, but one that has adjusted to preserve balance under new conditions. To ignore this is to misunderstand both biology and aging itself. With time, tissues gradually become less sensitive to insulin, not because the body is careless, but because cells protect themselves from constant stimulation. This subtle insulin resistance is often portrayed as a problem to be eliminated at all costs. Yet in many cases it is a protective adaptation, slowing glucose entry into cells that no longer divide or regenerate as rapidly. Muscles, which once acted as powerful reservoirs for glucose, tend to shrink if physical activity declines, reducing the body's capacity to store sugar efficiently. The pancreas compensates by altering insulin release, and the liver adjusts how and when it releases glucose into the bloodstream. These changes happen quietly, without drama, and often without symptoms, yet they fundamentally reshape what blood sugar values mean in an older body. This is why a number that appears slightly higher than youthful norms does not automatically signal danger after 65. Context matters. A stable glucose level that gently rises and falls in response to meals and activity may represent a body that has found equilibrium. In contrast, a lower number achieved through aggressive medication or strict dietary restriction may push the system into instability, increasing the risk of sudden drops that the aging brain and nervous system are less equipped to handle. The body's priority shifts with age, favoring predictability over precision, resilience over optimization. Blood sugar becomes less about hitting a target and more about sustaining reliable energy delivery to vital organs. The idea of normal must therefore evolve. Normal is not a universal constant. It is a relationship between physiology and circumstance. After 65, that relationship is shaped by accumulated cellular stress, altered hormone signaling, and changes in body composition. Fat tissue communicates differently, muscle tissue responds more slowly, and even red blood cells may live slightly shorter lives, influencing long-term glucose markers. To apply the same thresholds used for younger adults is to ignore these realities, reducing a complex adaptive system to a simplistic judgment. Biology does not operate on absolutes. It operates on patterns and probabilities. Blood sugar also reflects the broader story of how the body copes with time. Sleep becomes lighter and more fragmented, subtly influencing glucose regulation through stress hormones. Physical activity may shift from intensity to consistency, changing how muscles draw in sugar. Digestion slows, altering the timing of glucose absorption. Even emotional stress, more common in later life due to loss or uncertainty, can elevate blood sugar through hormonal pathways that evolved for survival, not laboratory tests. Each of these factors leaves a trace in glucose readings, making them markers of lived experience as much as metabolism. When doctors focus narrowly on numerical targets without explaining this adaptive context, seniors may internalize the idea that their bodies are failing them. This can lead to fear-driven decisions, unnecessary medication adjustments, or restrictive eating patterns that undermine strength and vitality. Yet when blood sugar is reframed as feedback rather than judgment, a different relationship emerges. Seniors begin to see their readings as signals of how their bodies are responding to daily life, offering clues about sleep quality, activity levels, stress, and nourishment. The number becomes a messenger, not a verdict. Understanding blood sugar as an adaptive measure also aligns with how aging bodies prioritize survival. The brain remains critically dependent on glucose, and its tolerance for deprivation decreases with age. Slightly higher baseline levels may act as a buffer, ensuring consistent fuel delivery even during periods of reduced intake or illness. This buffering capacity is rarely discussed, yet it may explain why some older adults function better with glucose levels that would be discouraged in younger populations. Adaptation in this sense is not compromise, but wisdom encoded in physiology. To appreciate normal blood sugar after 65 is to accept that health is not the absence of deviation, but the presence of balance. It is the ability of the body to maintain internal order amid external and internal change. Glucose regulation becomes one expression of that order, shaped by decades of interaction between genes, lifestyle, and environment. When viewed through this lens, blood sugar is no longer a simple scorecard, but part of a larger conversation about how the body continues to sustain life, preserve function, and adapt intelligently to the passage of time. As the body moves beyond 65, the systems that manage blood sugar do not stop working. They simply begin to work differently, shaped by years of use and gradual biological refinement. Insulin, the hormone often blamed when blood sugar rises, is still produced, still released, still active, but its message is received more selectively by aging cells. This is not negligence on the body's part. Cells adapt their sensitivity to insulin over time as a way of preserving internal stability, preventing overstimulation and conserving energy in tissues that no longer regenerate as quickly as they once did. What appears clinically as reduced insulin sensitivity is, in many cases, a measured response to aging rather than a sudden malfunction. Muscle tissue plays a central role in this story. In younger years, muscles act as a vast storage system for glucose, pulling sugar out of the bloodstream efficiently after meals. With age and often with reduced physical activity, muscle mass gradually declines, shrinking this storage capacity. Even small losses of muscle have outsized effects on glucose handling because muscle is one of the primary tissues that respond to insulin. When less muscle is available, more glucose remains circulating in the blood, not because the body is mismanaging it, but because the architecture of storage has changed. This shift alone can raise blood sugar readings without indicating disease. Yet it is rarely explained in clinical conversations. The liver, another key player, also changes its behavior with age. It serves as both a reservoir and a regulator, releasing glucose between meals and during the night to maintain stable energy supply, particularly for the brain. In older adults, the liver may become slightly more conservative, releasing glucose more readily to avoid energy shortages. This adaptation can elevate fasting blood sugar levels, especially in the morning, even in individuals who eat well and remain active. Without understanding this hepatic adjustment, morning readings can be misinterpreted as failure rather than a reflection of the body's protective strategy. Hormonal signals beyond insulin also shift subtly over time. Growth hormone, which supports muscle maintenance and glucose regulation, declines with age. Sex hormones, which influence body composition and insulin sensitivity, change significantly after midlife. Cortisol, the stress hormone, may follow altered daily rhythms, sometimes remaining elevated longer than in younger individuals. Each of these hormonal shifts influences how glucose is processed, stored, and released. Blood sugar then becomes a composite signal, integrating the activity of multiple systems rather than reflecting the performance of insulin alone. These physiological changes help explain why two seniors with similar lifestyles can show different blood sugar patterns. Genetics, lifelong activity habits, and accumulated stress all influence how insulin receptors behave and how muscles respond to glucose. The variability seen in older adults is not noise. It is the natural expression of individual biology shaped over decades. Applying uniform targets to such diverse systems risks oversimplifying a deeply personalized process. Importantly, the aging brain adds another layer to this dynamic. The brain relies almost exclusively on glucose for energy, and with age, its ability to tolerate fluctuations diminishes. The body adapts by prioritizing consistent glucose availability, even if that means maintaining slightly higher circulating levels. This priority reflects a shift from optimization to preservation, from maximizing efficiency to ensuring reliability. Blood sugar values in this context reflect the body's effort to safeguard cognitive function and neurological stability, goals that outweigh numerical ideals. Understanding these changes reframes the narrative around blood sugar in seniors. Elevated readings are often interpreted as warnings, yet they may simply signal an altered balance between muscle mass, liver function, and hormonal signaling. When clinicians and individuals alike focus exclusively on insulin as the culprit, they miss the broader orchestration of systems adapting together. Blood sugar becomes a misunderstood messenger, carrying information about muscle health, hormonal environment, and energy priorities rather than issuing a simple verdict of control or failure. This perspective opens the door to more constructive responses. Supporting muscle through regular strength-based movement can enhance glucose uptake without forcing the system through medication alone. Adequate protein intake provides the raw materials muscles need to remain metabolically active. Managing stress and improving sleep can recalibrate cortisol rhythms, indirectly supporting insulin sensitivity. These interventions work with the body's evolving physiology rather than against it. Acknowledging that insulin response after 65 is shaped by a lifetime of adaptation. When seniors understand that insulin, muscle, and liver function evolve together, blood sugar readings become interpretable rather than alarming. They reflect the state of the body's energy network, influenced by structure, signaling, and demand. Normal, in this light, is not defined by youthful efficiency, but by the capacity of these systems to coordinate effectively under changing conditions, preserving clarity, strength, and metabolic resilience as the body continues its quiet work of adaptation. Lowering blood sugar has long been framed as an unquestionable goal, a sign of discipline and medical success. Yet after 65, this assumption deserves careful reconsideration. The aging body does not respond to glucose reduction with the same resilience it once did, and what appears beneficial in theory can quietly become destabilizing in practice. Aggressive control, whether through high medication doses, overly strict dietary rules, or intense restriction, often overlooks the fundamental shift in how older physiology prioritizes safety and continuity. In later life, the body values consistency more than precision, and blood sugar that is driven too low, too quickly, or too often can place stress on systems already operating with narrower margins. One of the most immediate dangers of overly tight blood sugar control is hypoglycemia, a state of insufficient glucose in the bloodstream. In younger individuals, brief drops may be uncomfortable but manageable. In older adults, they can be disorienting, dangerous, and sometimes life-threatening. The brain, which depends heavily on glucose, becomes less tolerant of sudden shortages with age. A drop that might go unnoticed in midlife can cause confusion, blurred vision, weakness, or loss of balance after 65. These symptoms increase the risk of falls, a major source of injury and loss of independence among seniors. What makes hypoglycemia particularly insidious is that it can occur without warning, especially in those whose hormonal responses to low glucose have dulled over time. The cardiovascular system also reacts differently to low blood sugar in older age. Hypoglycemia triggers stress hormones that raise heart rate and blood pressure, placing sudden demands on a heart that may already be coping with decades of wear. These hormonal surges can provoke arrhythmias or contribute to vascular strain, particularly in individuals with underlying heart disease. In this context, a blood sugar reading that looks impressively low on a chart may conceal a physiological state of stress rather than health. Stability, not suppression, becomes the safer and more sustainable goal. Aggressive lowering of blood sugar can also accelerate muscle loss, a consequence that often goes unrecognized. When dietary intake is restricted too severely or insulin levels are driven high through medication, the body may turn to muscle tissue for fuel. Muscle breakdown releases amino acids that can be converted into glucose, a survival mechanism that protects the brain but weakens the body. Over time, this contributes to sarcopenia, reducing strength, mobility, and metabolic capacity. The paradox is striking. In the effort to improve blood sugar numbers, the very tissues that help regulate glucose are eroded, making long-term control more difficult. The psychological burden of strict control further complicates the picture. Constant vigilance, fear of bad numbers, and rigid eating rules can transform daily life into a source of anxiety. Stress itself raises blood sugar through hormonal pathways, creating a feedback loop in which the pursuit of perfect control undermines metabolic stability. For seniors, whose emotional well-being is closely tied to physical resilience, this stress can have tangible effects on sleep, appetite, and overall quality of life. Health becomes a battleground rather than a supportive framework. Scientific research increasingly supports the idea that mildly elevated but stable blood sugar levels may be safer for older adults than tightly controlled ones that fluctuate widely. Variability, more than absolute level, is associated with vascular damage, cognitive decline, and increased mortality in seniors. Each sharp rise and fall places stress on blood vessels and nerves, contributing to long-term complications. Stability smooths these stresses, allowing tissues to adapt and function without repeated shocks. This does not mean that blood sugar is irrelevant, but that its management must be tempered by an understanding of aging physiology. The concept of normal after 65 therefore shifts from numerical ideals to functional outcomes. Does the individual feel clear-headed? Is balance steady? Is energy consistent throughout the day? Can daily activities be performed without fear of sudden weakness? These questions capture the lived reality of blood sugar control more accurately than isolated readings. A slightly higher fasting glucose that supports mental clarity and physical stability may be far healthier than a lower number achieved at the cost of frequent lows or chronic fatigue. When clinicians and seniors alike embrace this perspective, treatment strategies evolve. Medications may be adjusted to reduce the risk of hypoglycemia rather than to chase tight targets. Dietary guidance may emphasize regular, balanced meals that support steady glucose delivery instead of extreme restriction. Physical activity can be framed as a tool for enhancing glucose stability through muscle engagement rather than as a punishment for elevated numbers. These shifts align medical care with the body's changing priorities. Aggressively lowering blood sugar after 65 often reflects a misunderstanding of what health looks like in an aging body. The goal is not to replicate youthful metabolism, but to support a system that has adapted to time and experience. Mildly higher readings, when stable and accompanied by good function, can represent equilibrium rather than danger. Recognizing this allows blood sugar management to become an act of preservation rather than control, supporting safety, resilience, and quality of life in a body that continues to negotiate the demands of aging with remarkable, if often unacknowledged, intelligence. As we age, the brain's relationship with blood sugar becomes more delicate, more demanding of consistency, and far less forgiving of extremes. Glucose is the brain's primary fuel. And unlike muscles or fat tissue, the brain cannot store it in meaningful amounts. It depends on a steady supply delivered through the bloodstream, moment by moment, day and night. In younger years, the brain tolerates fluctuations with remarkable flexibility. It can compensate for brief drops or spikes without much consequence. After 65, this tolerance narrows. The aging brain becomes more sensitive to variability, and what once felt like a minor dip in energy can now translate into confusion, dizziness, or loss of balance. This heightened sensitivity is not a sign of weakness, but of accumulated complexity. Over decades, neurons undergo structural and functional changes. Blood vessels supplying the brain may become less elastic, altering how efficiently glucose and oxygen are delivered. The protective barriers that regulate what enters brain tissue change subtly, influencing how metabolic shifts are felt at a cognitive level. Neurotransmitter systems that rely on stable energy availability become more vulnerable to disruption. In this context, sharp rises and falls in blood sugar are not neutral events. They are physiological stresses that ripple through cognitive and motor systems. When blood sugar drops too low, even briefly, the brain reacts immediately. Attention falters, reaction time slows, and judgment becomes impaired. In seniors, these effects are magnified because compensatory hormonal responses, such as the release of adrenaline or glucagon, may be delayed or blunted. The body does not always issue a clear warning before cognitive function is affected. A moment of lightheadedness can become a misstep, a loss of balance, or a fall. This is why hypoglycemia is one of the most dangerous yet underappreciated risks in older adults, especially when blood sugar is aggressively controlled. Equally important is the impact of frequent fluctuations. Even when values remain within what is technically considered a normal range, the brain thrives on predictability. Repeated swings force it to constantly adapt, diverting resources from higher functions like memory, coordination, and emotional regulation. Over time, this metabolic instability can contribute to mental fatigue, reduced concentration, and a general sense of fragility. Seniors may describe feeling off or unsteady without realizing that subtle glucose variability is at the root of these sensations. Balance, both literal and neurological, is closely tied to this stability. The systems that govern posture and movement integrate signals from the brain, in the ear, muscles, and vision. When the brain's energy supply is inconsistent, this integration suffers. Reflexes slow, spatial awareness diminishes, and the confidence needed for fluid movement erodes. Falls rarely result from a single cause. They emerge from a convergence of small instabilities, and blood sugar fluctuations are often an invisible contributor. A stable glucose environment supports not just cognition, but the physical confidence required for safe movement. Clarity of thought is another casualty of instability. Seniors often report episodes of brain fog, forgetfulness, or sudden mental fatigue. These experiences are frequently attributed to aging alone, yet metabolic factors play a significant role. The brain's processing speed and memory consolidation depend on uninterrupted energy flow. When glucose availability wavers, these processes falter. Importantly, this can occur even in individuals without diagnosed diabetes, highlighting that blood sugar sensitivity after 65 is a universal concern, not a niche medical issue. Scientific observation increasingly reinforces the idea that variability, rather than absolute blood sugar level, is a critical determinant of neurological health in older adults. Stable, moderately controlled glucose supports vascular integrity, reduces oxidative stress, and preserves cognitive function. Conversely, wide swings strain blood vessels and neural tissue, accelerating processes associated with cognitive decline. The brain's demand is simple but uncompromising: consistency over perfection. This understanding challenges conventional approaches that prioritize numerical targets without regard for daily lived experience. A senior whose blood sugar remains steady, even if slightly above youthful norms, may enjoy sharper cognition and better balance than someone whose readings oscillate dramatically in pursuit of idealized numbers. Normal in this context is defined by how the brain performs in real life, how clearly one thinks, how confidently one moves, and how safely one navigates daily activities. Recognizing the brain's heightened sensitivity after 65 invites a gentler, more intelligent approach to blood sugar management. Meals that provide sustained energy, routines that avoid long fasting periods, and treatments that minimize the risk of lows all align with the brain's needs. This approach honors the central role of neurological stability in overall well-being. Blood sugar becomes not just a metabolic metric, but a guardian of clarity, balance, and independence. reflecting the profound truth that in later life health is measured by how well the mind and body remain aligned in their quiet, continuous work together. A single blood sugar reading offers certainty, but it offers very little understanding. It freezes a living process into a moment, stripping it of context, rhythm, and meaning. After 65, this limitation becomes especially significant because the body no longer behaves in predictable linear ways. Glucose regulation unfolds over hours and days, shaped by sleep, movement, meals, stress, and even emotional states. When attention is focused on one isolated number, the larger story of how the body manages energy throughout daily life is easily missed. Blood sugar naturally rises and falls in response to eating, activity, and rest. In older adults, these rises and falls may occur more slowly or linger longer, not because the system is broken, but because digestion, hormone signaling, and tissue response have all shifted. A fasting measurement taken in the morning reflects what happened overnight, influenced by liver glucose release, sleep quality, stress hormones, and even hydration. It does not reveal how the body responds to breakfast, how quickly sugar is cleared after a walk, or how energy levels feel in the afternoon. Yet these patterns often matter far more than a single data point. Daily glucose rhythms are closely tied to sleep, which changes with age. Older adults often experience lighter sleep, more awakenings, or earlier rising. These disruptions influence cortisol, a hormone that raises blood sugar to prepare the body for wakefulness. A higher morning reading may simply reflect fragmented sleep rather than poor metabolic health. Without examining the broader rhythm, that number can be misinterpreted as failure, prompting unnecessary concern or intervention. Movement also plays a crucial role in shaping glucose patterns. Muscles draw glucose from the bloodstream when they contract, independent of insulin. A short walk after meals, light stretching, or routine household activity can significantly influence how blood sugar behaves over the course of a day. A single reading taken before or after movement misses this dynamic entirely. Two seniors with identical fasting glucose may have vastly different daily profiles depending on how often and how gently they move. One may experience smooth, gradual curves of glucose rise and fall, while the other may face prolonged elevations simply due to inactivity, yet the snapshot number fails to capture this distinction. Meals introduce another layer of complexity. Aging affects digestion and absorption, often slowing the process and altering how carbohydrates are broken down. Protein and fat content, meal timing, and portion size all influence glucose response. A single reading cannot reveal whether blood sugar spikes sharply after meals or rises gradually and remains stable. These differences are critical, as sharp spikes followed by rapid drops strain the body and the brain, while steady patterns support energy and clarity. Understanding these nuances requires observing trends, not isolated values. Stress, both physical and emotional, leaves a clear imprint on blood sugar rhythms. Worry, pain, illness, or even excitement can raise glucose through hormonal pathways designed for survival. Seniors may experience stresses related to health concerns, social changes, or loss, all of which can subtly alter daily glucose patterns. A low measurement taken during a stressful moment may misrepresent the body's usual state, leading to conclusions that do not reflect typical function. Patterns reveal resilience in a way numbers cannot. A body that maintains relatively stable glucose across different situations demonstrates adaptability and balance. Even if readings are slightly higher than conventional norms, consistency suggests that systems are working together effectively. In contrast, frequent swings indicate vulnerability, even when average numbers appear acceptable. This distinction becomes especially important after 65, when the consequences of instability are magnified in cognition, balance, and cardiovascular stress. Modern tools increasingly allow for pattern recognition, whether through repeated self-monitoring, journaling, or continuous glucose tracking. Yet even without technology, seniors can observe patterns through experience, noticing when energy dips, when hunger arises, how sleep quality affects morning clarity, and how movement influences well-being. These observations provide a richer understanding of glucose regulation than any single lab result. The reliance on snapshots often stems from a desire for simplicity, but biology resists simplification. The aging body communicates through trends, cycles, and responses rather than static values. When seniors are encouraged to look beyond individual readings, they begin to see blood sugar as a narrative unfolding over time. This narrative includes how the body prepares for the day, how it responds to nourishment, how it recovers with rest, and how it adapts to stress. Normal emerges not as a fixed point, but as a stable pattern that supports daily life. Shifting attention from single numbers to rhythms changes the emotional experience of monitoring. Anxiety diminishes when fluctuations are understood as part of a pattern, rather than as isolated failures. Curiosity replaces fear, and observation replaces judgment. Seniors gain insight into how their choices shape their internal environment, empowering them to adjust gently rather than react abruptly. In later life, health is less about precision and more about coherence. Blood sugar rhythms that align with energy, cognition, and physical confidence signal a body functioning in harmony with its circumstances. A single reading cannot convey this harmony. Only through observing patterns across time can the true meaning of blood sugar after 65 be understood, revealing a dynamic process that reflects adaptation, resilience, and the body's ongoing effort to sustain balance in the face of continual change. After the age of 65, the relationship between blood sugar and the body becomes deeply intertwined with composition rather than weight or appearance. What matters increasingly is not how much the body weighs, but what that weight is made of and how those tissues behave metabolically. Muscle, fat, and water are not passive materials. They are active participants in glucose regulation, each influencing how sugar enters, circulates, and is used within the body. When doctors speak only in terms of blood sugar numbers without addressing these internal components, they leave out the very systems doing most of the work. Muscle tissue plays a central role in blood sugar control, especially in older adults. Skeletal muscle is one of the largest consumers of glucose in the body, acting as a storage site and a regulator. When muscles contract, they absorb glucose from the bloodstream without relying heavily on insulin. This mechanism becomes more valuable with age, as insulin sensitivity naturally declines. However, after 65, muscle mass often decreases due to inactivity, illness, or inadequate protein intake. This loss quietly reduces the body's capacity to clear glucose efficiently, even when eating habits remain unchanged. Blood sugar readings may slowly rise not because of dietary excess, but because there is simply less muscle available to manage incoming glucose. This explains why two seniors with similar diets can show very different blood sugar patterns. One may maintain stable levels due to preserved muscle mass from regular movement, while the other experiences persistent elevations despite eating carefully. The scale does not reveal this difference, and neither does a single glucose reading. Only an understanding of body composition explains why gentle strength-building activities can sometimes lower blood sugar more effectively than dietary restriction alone. Fat tissue also deserves a more nuanced understanding. In popular health narratives, fat is often portrayed as an enemy, something to be eliminated to improve metabolic health. Yet fat plays essential roles, especially in later life. It stores energy, cushions organs, and participates in hormone production. The issue is not the presence of fat, but its distribution and behavior. With aging, fat tends to shift toward deeper visceral areas around the organs. This type of fat is more metabolically active and can interfere with insulin signaling, subtly raising blood sugar over time. However, aggressively reducing fat through extreme calorie restriction can backfire after 65. Rapid weight loss often removes muscle along with fat, weakening the very tissue needed for glucose regulation. It can also increase stress hormones, which raise blood sugar further. The body interprets severe restriction as a threat, responding by conserving energy and releasing glucose into the bloodstream. What appears to be disciplined control can paradoxically destabilize metabolism. especially in older adults with lower physiological reserves. Hydration, often overlooked, is another silent factor shaping blood sugar readings. Water makes up a large portion of blood volume and cellular space. Dehydration concentrates glucose in the bloodstream, artificially elevating readings without reflecting a true metabolic failure. Seniors are particularly vulnerable to dehydration due to reduced thirst sensation, medication effects, or fear of frequent urination. A mildly elevated blood sugar reading may sometimes signal insufficient fluid intake rather than impaired glucose control, restoring hydration to normalized levels in ways that no medication adjustment ever could. Water also facilitates glucose transport into cells and supports kidney function, which helps remove excess sugar from the blood. When hydration is inadequate, these processes slow, creating a misleading picture of poor control. Yet hydration is rarely discussed during routine blood sugar evaluations, despite its profound influence on results. Beyond individual components, it is the interaction between muscle, fat, and water that shapes metabolic stability. Muscle draws glucose, fat modulates hormone signaling, and water ensures smooth transport and clearance. When these elements are balanced, blood sugar behaves predictably and gently. When one component is compromised, the entire system compensates, often in ways that elevate glucose as a protective response. This perspective reframes rising blood sugar after 65 not as a personal failure, but as a signal asking deeper questions. Has muscle mass declined due to inactivity or illness? Has fat distribution shifted due to hormonal changes or prolonged stress? Is hydration sufficient to support circulation and kidney function? These questions lead to interventions that support the body rather than punish it. Understanding body composition also changes how success is measured. Improvements may appear as better energy, steadier appetite, fewer dizzy spells, or more confidence in movement long before numbers shift on a chart. Blood sugar may still fluctuate within a slightly higher range, yet overall function improves. This is not a contradiction, but a reflection of aging physiology prioritizing stability over optimization. When seniors are taught to view blood sugar through the lens of composition and function, they gain agency. They learn that gentle strength training, adequate protein, sufficient hydration, and stress reduction are not secondary lifestyle choices but primary metabolic tools. The body becomes an ally again, not an adversary that must be forced into compliance. This shift replaces fear with understanding and rigid targets with responsive care. Blood sugar stops being an isolated metric and becomes part of a broader conversation about how the body maintains balance with the resources it has. After 65, that balance depends less on chasing perfect numbers and more on preserving the tissues and conditions that allow glucose to be handled with grace, adaptability, and resilience as the body continues its quiet, intelligent work of sustaining life through changing seasons, changing strength, and changing needs, responding moment by moment to nourishment, movement, rest, and internal signals that speak not in absolutes but in patterns that reward patience, observation, and respect for the body's evolving design, where health is not frozen at a youthful ideal but reshaped continuously through care, awareness, and a willingness to listen to what the body is asking for rather than what charts insist it should be. Blood sugar patterns, when observed over time, offer a far more truthful portrait of health after 65 than any isolated laboratory number ever could. The body does not live in snapshots, it lives in rhythms. Glucose rises and falls in response to waking and sleeping, eating and fasting, movement and stillness, calm and stress. A single reading captures only one moment in this ongoing conversation, stripped of context and meaning. Yet medical discussions often treat that moment as definitive, labeling it normal or abnormal, without asking what the body was doing before or after, or how it behaves across an entire day or week. As the body ages, its capacity for rapid correction changes. Younger systems are elastic, snapping back quickly from spikes or dips in blood sugar. Older systems move more deliberately, favoring steadiness over speed, This means a slightly higher fasting number may coexist with remarkable stability throughout the day, while a perfect reading can mask dangerous swings that exhaust the brain and nervous system. Resilience, in this sense, is not about achieving youthful numbers, but about maintaining coherence and predictability within the body's internal environment. Patterns reveal whether glucose rises gently after meals or surges abruptly, whether it settles smoothly or crashes unexpectedly. These patterns tell stories about insulin sensitivity, muscle engagement, liver glucose release, and hormonal balance. A senior whose blood sugar fluctuates within a narrow, consistent range often experiences clearer thinking, steadier energy, and fewer balance issues, even if their numbers sit slightly above conventional targets. Another individual may meet every numerical guideline yet experience frequent dizziness, confusion, or fatigue due to hidden instability that only pattern recognition would expose. The aging brain is especially sensitive to these fluctuations. It relies almost exclusively on glucose for fuel, and sudden changes can disrupt attention, memory, and emotional regulation. Repeated highs followed by sharp drops place stress on neural tissue, increasing the risk of falls, mood disturbances, and cognitive decline. Stability becomes a form of protection, preserving not only metabolic health, but dignity and independence. Patterns that support the brain often matter more than absolute values printed on a lab report. Stress further complicates this picture. Emotional strain, poor sleep, illness, or even anxiety about blood sugar itself can raise glucose levels through hormonal pathways. Cortisol and adrenaline signal the liver to release stored sugar, preparing the body for perceived threats. In seniors, this response can be exaggerated and prolonged. A single high reading taken during stress may reflect the nervous system rather than dietary or metabolic failure. Only by observing trends over time can one distinguish between chronic dysregulation and temporary adaptation. Medication decisions based solely on isolated numbers risk disrupting these natural compensations. Lowering blood sugar aggressively without understanding its daily rhythm can push the body into hypoglycemia, a state far more dangerous for older adults than mild hypoglycemia. Falls, confusion, heart rhythm disturbances, and loss of consciousness are real risks when stability is sacrificed for numerical precision. Patterns help clinicians and individuals see where gentle support is needed and where the body is already managing effectively. Daily observation also empowers seniors to recognize how their own bodies respond to specific foods, activities, and routines. A short walk after meals may smooth post-meal rises more effectively than medication adjustments. Adequate sleep may lower morning readings more reliably than dietary restriction. Even social connection and laughter can influence glucose patterns by calming the nervous system. These insights emerge only when blood sugar is viewed as a dynamic signal rather than a judgment. Technology has made pattern recognition more accessible, but even simple awareness can be transformative. Noticing how energy feels before meals, how clarity changes in the afternoon, or how the body responds to rest days versus active days provides valuable information. The goal shifts from control to collaboration, from forcing numbers down to supporting the conditions that allow balance to emerge naturally. This approach honors the wisdom of the aging body. Rather than assuming decline, it recognizes adaptation. The body adjusts its priorities, allocating resources to maintain core functions and stability. Slightly higher glucose may be part of that strategy, ensuring consistent fuel supply to vital organs. When viewed through patterns, these adjustments appear intelligent rather than pathological. By focusing on trends instead of thresholds, seniors can release the constant pressure of measurement and evaluation. Blood sugar becomes a guide, not a verdict. Each reading joins a larger narrative, one that reflects resilience built over decades of living, healing, adapting, and surviving. Health after 65 is not about replicating the metabolic profile of youth, but about sustaining harmony in a system that has changed its tempo and learned new ways to stay balanced. Understanding this allows care to become more humane and more precise at the same time. It respects individuality, context, and lived experience. Patterns illuminate the body's ongoing effort to remain stable amid changing physiology, offering insight into how nourishment, movement, rest, and emotional well-being converge to support life. In this light, blood sugar is no longer a solitary number to fear, but a living signal that reflects the body's continuous negotiation with time, environment, and internal needs, inviting observation, patience, and trust in the quiet intelligence that persists long after 65, expressing itself not through perfection, but through consistency, adaptability, and the subtle strength of systems that endure by staying in rhythm rather than in range. Understanding blood sugar as a dynamic conversation rather than a fixed verdict transforms the experience of health after 65 in profound ways. When numbers are treated as commands or warnings, they often provoke fear, urgency, and a sense of personal failure. But when they are viewed as messages, the emotional tone shifts. Each reading becomes a piece of information offered by the body, shaped by recent meals, movement, sleep, stress, and even emotions. This perspective invites curiosity instead of judgment, allowing seniors to engage with their health in a calmer and more thoughtful manner. The body does not speak in absolutes. It communicates through patterns, tendencies, and responses. Blood sugar rises not to punish, but to supply energy when the body perceives a need. It falls not to signal danger, but to restore balance after that need has passed. After 65, these signals may appear different from those of earlier decades, yet they remain purposeful. Recognizing this helps seniors trust that their bodies are still working with them, not against them, even when readings do not align perfectly with conventional charts. When blood sugar is understood as an ongoing dialogue, it naturally encourages adaptive behavior rather than rigid control. Seniors begin to notice how a gentle walk after a meal steadies glucose more effectively than skipping food, or how restful sleep softens morning readings better than late-night worry. They learn that nourishment, movement, and rest are not rules to obey, but tools to experiment with. This sense of agency restores confidence, especially for those who have felt overwhelmed by complex medical instructions or conflicting advice. This approach also reduces the psychological burden that often accompanies chronic monitoring. Fear itself alters physiology, activating stress hormones that elevate blood sugar and strain the nervous system. By shifting attention from perfection to understanding, stress diminishes, and the body often responds with greater stability. Calm awareness becomes a form of treatment, supporting metabolic balance through nervous system regulation and improved decision-making. A conversational view of blood sugar fosters respect for individuality. Two seniors may respond very differently to the same meal or activity, not because one is disciplined and the other is not, but because their bodies have different histories, compositions, and needs. Honoring these differences allows care to become more personalized and compassionate. It encourages collaboration between individuals and healthcare providers, where insights from daily life are valued alongside laboratory results. This mindset also reframes success. Progress is no longer measured solely by lower numbers, but by improved energy, clearer thinking, steadier moods, and greater confidence in daily activities. Blood sugar becomes one thread in a larger tapestry of well-being, interconnected with balance, strength, sleep, and emotional resilience. Seniors who adopt this view often find themselves more engaged in life, less preoccupied with monitoring, and more attentive to how they actually feel. By listening to blood sugar as part of an evolving story, seniors reclaim authorship of their health journey. They move from reacting to readings toward understanding what those readings reflect about their current state. This shift nurtures patience and self-respect, recognizing that the body at 65 and beyond operates with wisdom shaped by time. In embracing this dialogue, seniors learn to respond thoughtfully rather than react fearfully, aligning daily choices with the body's signals and supporting a form of health that is measured not by rigid standards, but by adaptability, awareness, and a sustained sense of inner balance that grows from cooperation with the body's intelligence rather than opposition to it.